All right, so first thing is we're changing topics. So I'm doing SVG today, which is sort of an easy topic, a sort of a break between the end of the material for test one and you getting ready for test one, and then React, which is sort of the harder material of the course. So the new material I'm starting today is just sort of like the break in between, but we also have to schedule our first test. And I also have somewhere in here.
Is it the example is lab 7, right?
Lab 7, correct. So we have Lab 7 was due today, so we're eligible for a test sort of anytime starting soon. I've got also an electronics test, and so I know I always ask for them to not, if you have other major exams and that test is not scheduled and it won't be on the same day, that's under my control. Are there any tests that I've asked you to tell me about, but you haven't told me about coming up? 21, 23, 28, 2. That's the period in which I am looking to get both of these tests out of the way. And for electronics, I can't do the 21. I could do 23, 28, or 2. And for this class, 21, 23, 28, 2 are all up for grabs. Thoughts? Yes. Can I do for what? For this class? This class is this test covers 2 periods. So that's only one of the dates. So the other class, the electronics, is a 1-day test. This is a 2-day test. One test will cover interfacing, the other parsing and objects. So you want this, you're hoping for this class to be the second for one of the days. So that's the last possible day I have on offer. I need another day as well. Are we thinking? And I also have to somewhere in here also slip an electronics test, which you also have to take. Do you want for 2 consecutive Thursdays for this and the electronics in between, or other people talk to me? It's not just him. So you're thinking 23rd, 2nd electronics here. Does anybody have issues with that, or is that everything's sort of pushed later? Nobody wants anything on the 21st. Okay, I get it. Nobody has any other major exams. My other class that people you might be in has like more of a midterm, so that's later. So okay, that's on like 13 labs or something like that. So that comes later. So let's go with that then. 20. I'll put it in an announcement, but 23rd it will be a 3-4-3 test, as will the 2nd. And the 28th will be an electronics test. Okay, so I have some announcements to put out. Very good. The labs and homework are not marked late until the day of, in this class, the 2nd test, but you can use the labs on the tests, so it's to your advantage to have all the labs done before the test. What else? The homework stuff for the most, some of the JavaScript part may be on the test, but the sort of CSS stuff and other than the HTML elements we've been using regularly, but the HTML element sort of survey we've been doing in homework, that won't be on the test. You're allowed to use them if they pop up and they're useful to you. You're not banned from using them, but they won't be sort of, the test will be more like labs. So if you are behind, then a strategy would be to sort of put off homework and catch up on labs. And then we will do, what did we say, the 23rd of February and March 2nd for this class, one focused on interfacing, one focused on parsing and objects, electronics on the 28th. Any questions? It's a programming, write a program such that, so it's like the labs. If you've seen labs, and a number of the labs are like this, where it says give me a title and give me a header and all that stuff, that was probably some prior exam, so that'll give you an idea what an exam is like. There's no vocabulary, it's all out programming. You can use your examples, my examples, anything you find on the internet. You can't interact with a live person. You can ask questions about if you don't understand what it's supposed to do. Sometimes I'll even answer a question if you have, won't repeatedly come to you and get you past all your debugging issues, but sometimes I'll answer one question, but if you keep calling me over, I just walk more and more slowly toward you till I come to a stop. Any questions? Okay. Right. If so, you expect you can use your examples. I come up to some of you and you're not working from examples, which drives me crazy. Supposed to work from examples. And so if I give you a set of radio buttons, you find the example that's a set of radio buttons. I will sometimes give you HTML head start if there's a complicated design or a lot of typing, one or the other. And you will, I'm expecting you to edit the HTML. I'm expecting you to give the radio buttons names so they act like a group. If I have two sets of radio buttons, I'm expecting you to give them different names. If I have a set of checkboxes, I'm expecting you to treat them as a set and to give them a name. If I give a one-off checkbox, I expect you to give it an ID and deal with it as a one-off. I expect you to give them values. I expect you to edit the HTML. I try to save you some typing. The value should be meaningful. I mean, all these sort of basic things that you don't have to program. I often give you like 3 examples of here's 3 levels of working with radio buttons. You can work at level 1 and still do well on the exam. So if you're a good programmer and you want to challenge yourself and you want to work at the higher level, then yes, by all means, please do. But if this course is hard for you and you want to, just cement your basics, then you can work at that first level. That's fine. React is a little bit more of a different beast. But for this first test, again, you can work at any level that you want. When I have you cannot, if I give you data to parse, ask me if you're allowed to edit the data. Basically, I want you to adapt to my delimiters rather than you edit and use the delimiters already written into your code. That's a bad habit. So you can ask and I will grant or not or deny permission for you to edit my data that you're parsing. But that's one thing you can't sort of take on your own. Okay, so we have a test in this class, two-part test. The 23rd is the first part, this March 2nd is the second part, labs 1 through 7. And you're allowed to use, work from examples, your labs, my demos, etc. No more questions. Okay. So then we're starting unit 9. So this is unit 9 and 10. So I usually sort of go through an example and go through like maybe 45 minutes and then give you time to work. Today I'm going to probably go more through a big litany of examples, but then there are 2 labs associated with this SVG stuff. So if you're caught up and you do these labs, then you don't have to show up Thursday. But if you're behind, by all means, show up Thursday, and you don't have to work on these labs because they're not due until test 2. So I'm trying to like clear out an easy topic to clear out time for the people who are behind to catch up. All right, here we go, SVG. SVG is scalar vector graphics, and it is a format for making images, but you can use SVG elements within HTML, and that's what we're going to look at. So I'm going to open everything up in code like normal. Clear out documents. I got too many things to look at here. Okay, so SVG, I'm just making an image, and then I added a little bit of JavaScript for fun, but this is mostly just about the SVG. So this is based on some artist who painted lots of squares. He was interested in how colors, visual perception of colors interact with each other. So he has this simple design of squares and makes them different colors. And so we're going to see the code that I used to make this. And then down here, I made the same thing, but I gave it a little JavaScript so that I can assign it different colors randomly. I like that one. Okay. So here's our SVG. So and it's again mainly HTML. So we have an open and a close SVG tag that is defining a region on the page for this drawing. There is another HTML5 to be more precise element that for drawing, and that is a canvas, but this is an older one, SVG. So I make it a certain width and height and background color, and so that space is this sort of dark red outer square. That is the SVG. Within the SVG, I am making, I have other elements. The SVG element has an open and a close, whereas these internal elements are singletons. They are just a single one. And so rect is short for rectangle. The X and the Y are its horizontal and vertical position. When you are designing anything on a page, then the X is from the left, and that's kind of, so we're measuring from the left edge, and so that 50 means we're 50 from the left side. And the 75 is down from the top. So the y-axis, a y comes from the top in when you are making pages. Okay, like if you ever studied physics or math, the y is usually up, but in design interface, y is down. Okay, so that's what this is a rectangle and starts 50 over and 75 down. It's got a smaller width of 400 and a smaller height of 400 and a slightly different shade of red. And then here is another rectangle that is from the SVG 100 in and 150 down with a smaller width of 300 and height of 300 and a brighter shade of red. And then the final one is 150 over and 225 down and a width and height of 200 and the brightest shade of red of all. Okay. The order matters. The order matters. The stuff that comes later is drawn on top. So this is the big rectangle, the 400 by 400, and then that went down. So the whole SVG went down first, then the big rectangle, then the next rectangle, and the next rectangle. So here's the SVG, here's the first rectangle, the second rectangle, the third rectangle. Let me purposely put it out of order. Let me cut this guy and paste him back up there. Now I have them out of order. I have the big guy last now. And the other two squares are there, but they're behind, so you don't see them. So the order matters. This will be on a test. It will be on test 2. I usually am nice. And in my instructions, instruct you to add things in the order in which they must be drawn, so you don't run into this problem. But some people know how to do one thing and don't know how to do the other, and so then they throw, rearrange my order, and then all of a sudden that thing that they had that was working is so no longer there. They probably just are, it's probably just hidden. So the order matters. All I did for this silly button at the bottom, I just remade the design and gave things IDs. I have a little button. In web design, a color is usually uses a color scheme known as RGB, where you specify amount of red and amount of blue and amount of green. Amount of green, red, then green, then blue. Let me get it right. Red, then green, then blue, RGB. And each one corresponds to an 8-bit number. So that allows for up to 256 possible values from 0 to 255. And so this math.floor, math.random times 256, that gives you a number between 0 and 255. So I'm picking a random color, an RGB. I'm going to the SVG. I'm going to its style. I'm going to the background color. When you're using background color as in style has a hyphen, background hyphen color. But when you are in JavaScript, it becomes background, no hyphen, but a capital C color. If you encounter a minus sign in JavaScript, it wants to subtract. So it can't match what's up here. And then I'm using a template literal. So I'm using the RGB function, but I'm substituting in the variables R and G and B. And in a template literal, you use that $ curly bracket. You could also do it by concatenation. You could write a function that converts these numbers into hex code. There are any number of ways to do this. This is just one. I did it again, the same RGB, but this time I'm doing it for the rectangle. And the rectangle doesn't have a background color. The rectangle has a fill. So these geometric objects that we are putting in the middle of the SVG, we tend to talk about stroke and fill. Stroke is the, do we have a border around it? And fill is the filling it in. Okay. And later on, we're going to see that the fill can be a gradient. So that would be fun. Questions on this first SVG? Okay. So the SVG element is a rectangle. And when this thing comes up on the test, it's just going to be a matter of syntax, following directions and syntax. This is here's the syntax for a rectangle. You say rect, you give it an X and a Y, a width and a height, and maybe some style. Okay. Next one is a target. So I want to be able to draw things other than rectangles. So I want to draw circles and write words. That's what we're doing next. So here's target. And I just made a target logo. And so this is using circles. And I'm also writing the word target. So you'll see some text. Okay, so here's my SVG again, with the 500, the height of 700. I made it a background color of FF. That's a white color. I could also say the word white. I could use RGB, and in FF in terms of RGB would be 255, 255, 255. All these various ways of writing the color can be used. Then I'm making a circle. In a rectangle, you specify the top left corner. For a circle, which makes sense, if you know anything about circles, you specify their center. So you specify a CX and a CY, the center of the circle horizontally and the center of the circle vertically. And then you give a radius of the circle. And then the style for me, I'm not doing any stroke, it's just a fill. And that's a red color. FF0000 is an obnoxiously bright red. Here's my second circle. It's going to be on top of the previous circle because of the order of my SVG elements. And it has the same CX and CY. It's got the same center. These are concentric circles, but it has a smaller radius and its color is white. And then I have another circle with the same center, an even smaller radius, and it goes back to red. So we can see that here was the red, here was the SVG, the big white is the SVG itself. I made the page color gray. So that gray is the page itself. So then I could see where the SVG was. The SVG was white, then a red circle, and a white circle, and a red circle. And then the text is this element down here, text. I'm specifying where it is, where it starts. You have to play a little bit with text. It can be difficult to position it, so you often need to play a little bit. At least I find. But here is, so there's an open text. Text has an open and a close. And then what you want written in the text is in between. I'm specifying, then it's a pretty big font, a 72-point font, and the font weight is bold. Okay. So that was the text at the bottom. Okay. Questions? No. Okay. Again, this is meant to be easy and the breaks get, so you have some time to get ready for the test. And before we start React, which is harder. Okay. So that was target. That was number 2. Let's look at number 3, which is an inchworm. So here's my picture of an inchworm. And these are not circles. They're a little bit taller, so they're going to be ellipses. And then I have to show you how to make this a little bit of a smile, which is I'm using a Bezier curve. Okay. So here is the, take that out. Here's the SVG. It's very wide but very short. We saw that. Very wide but short for my inchworm. Here is an ellipse. That first ellipse happens to be a circle because the Rx and the Ry. So an ellipse has two radii, a horizontal radius and a vertical radius. And so I can forget about circles entirely and always make use an ellipse and just have the 2 radii to be the same, and then it will be a circle. So a circle is an ellipse, but an ellipse is not a circle. Okay. So here is an ellipse. It is centered at 100 horizontally and 100 vertically. It's got horizontal and vertical radii, Rx and Ry, and its style is this sort of neon green, yellowy green color. That was the head. Here are the segments. The segments all have the same vertical position. So the centers of these are all the same vertically. The X's are increasing, so as I move across, the RX's and the RY's are decreasing. The segments get smaller as I go across, and they're not the same. So these again are ellipses, and I use that same obnoxious color for all of them. Here is a small black ellipse for the eye. So its position, its center is 60 horizontally and 75 vertically. It's got it's slightly taller, so its RY is taller, 15 compared to the 10, and it was black. So that was the eye of my inchworm. And then this Bezier path. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about this next, but let's give some idea what's going on here. M means I'm going to move to a certain spot in my SVG. So I'm moving to 30 horizontally and 150 vertically. And remember, we're moving vertically down from the top. So we're coming over 30 and down 150. So that's about that spot there. And then for a Bezier, there are different types of Bezier. This is the sort of simplest Bezier. You specify 2 points, and you start moving towards the second point. So you have this very first point that's your starting point. You have a second point, and the second point here with the Q is just going to be 50 over and no, so these are changes. So this is the change in X and the change in Y from this original point. And so I'm going to move towards a point that is 50 over horizontally and at the same level vertically. And then I have a second point, and that's where I'm going to end up. And that is 50 points over, but negative 30, meaning that I moved up. And so I move over. So there's a point here, sort of under this, here's the top of the smile. There is a point here, sort of at the same level horizontally, sorry, the same level vertically. So there was a point about here where my mouse is pointing, and that's the point, that's a middle point that's not on the curve. It's the point that you move toward on your first half of the path, and then you sort of move away from it and towards the last point. So that's the idea of this Bezier. So you have this point that's not on the curve, but it's the point that you sort of head towards as you're leaving the first point, and then a point that you sort of seem to come from on the second point. So it sort of gives you these slopes. Okay. So that was now, if I give you, on one of the labs, I just say, make a design, just make your own thing, use some stuff. So if you don't like Beziers, you don't have to. And then on the other one, I specify what I want from you. And so it's more like a test. And so if there were, if I on a test, if I put like a Bezier thing, I'd be pretty specific about what I want because they're hard to figure out. Whereas this up here in ellipse, I'm just going to say I want an ellipse with this center and these radii, and you go from there. But the Beziers are more difficult to figure out, especially if you're not familiar with sort of the code of drawing. Okay. I made a program here. That is sort of an interface of you sort of saying, where do you, like for one of these simple Bezier things, where do you want to start? I'm starting at 100 and 100. So that's 100 over, 100 down. So I'm starting about here. I'm going to a point right now, 100 over and 100 down. So I'm starting here. I'm going to a point that is over and down from there. So that's, I'm sort of heading diagonally. And then where I'm going to end up is back under the original one. So my final destination has no change in X from the original point. So I'm sort of coming horizontally, I'm coming back, but vertically I'm moving down to 200. And you can change these numbers, but it's saying, oh, here's the path I made. There's my 100, 100, my 100, 100, my 0, 200. And here's it lined out. Here's my first point. Here's my second point. Here's my third point. Here's me heading toward, here's this dashed line heading toward the first point. Here's a dashed line heading from the middle point to the end point. And here's the actual curve. And here are the 3 points in red, the sort of 2 guiding lines in dashed blue, and then the actual Bezier curve in the black. So it's something that you can play with if you wanted to do a Bezier. Okay. And you can keep going. So this was just like one Bezier quadratic, but I can have multiple ones. And some people just, when I say make your own design, they make something very simple, and here's a square, a rectangle, and a circle, and that's good enough for me. And other people like to really do something. So if you want to challenge yourself, if you need my help, ask. So it was Valentine's Day, so I made a kind of crappy art out of Bezier. Here's my sort of crappy looking heart, needs some work. But I just want to show that you can keep going with this. This is all one big path. And I started off at 400, 200. So I went over 400 and down 200. So I'm starting here. And then the cue is always changes. So I'm going over -50. I'm moving back to the left. And I'm moving -150, so I'm moving vertically. And then my second point is -150, -150. So that was this first part. And then I can keep going. Here's another change, 2 more points. And then 2 more points and 2 more points until I got sort of all the way around the heart. So again, and I showed you in more detail, just sort of one segment of a path. Well, but once you get it going, you can just keep adding more and more cues. Okay. So. Happy Valentine's Day, all right. All right, here is, I want to show you how to make some lines. So this is just, and what I call optical illusion is just about drawing lines. So we've had a rectangle, we've had a circle, we've had an ellipse, we've had a curve. Now I'm going to draw straight lines. And we had text. And again, text was the only one that had an open and a close. The SVG had an open and a close, and the text had an open and a close, and everybody else was a singleton. And so here's a line, and lines have a starting point, an X and a Y, and an ending point, an X and a Y. And then you can also say at the end, does it sort of end abruptly, or is the end point sort of rounded? And so I gave 2 of them rounded line caps. Stroke is, again, the outline. So we saw fill before, which is filling in. And now we're looking at more lines, and lines are stroke. And then you can have things with both. So if my rectangles had stroke and fill, then I can make the border of the rectangle a different color than the fill of the rectangle. And so these are just points. Here's a point that goes from, here's the X and Y to a different X and Y. So this has the same Ys and different X's. So that means it's a horizontal line. So that's that horizontal line. And then these are those diagonal lines coming out of it. So there were 4 diagonals. Here, 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 and here. And then down here, I just have the same set, but different diagonals, the same sort of horizontal line, but just shifted down in different diagonals. And if you look at the code, you can see that those 2 middle lines have the same length. The X goes from 200 to 400, the X goes from 200 to 400, and that's the optical illusion, is that the first line is supposed to, in your eye, it looks longer, but they are actually the same length. Blah, blah. But all I really care about is that you, if you want, you know how to draw a line. Okay. And what else am I going to show you next? Pyramid. Okay, so we made, what did we make? We made the rectangles, we made the circles, we made the ellipses, we made lines, we made curves. This is the more generic shape, polygon. And I am also showing you a gradient. So instead of filling it in a solid color, sort of going from one color to another color. Okay, so here is my pyramid. And so I have some triangles here, and the triangles are filled with a gradient. And I also have a rectangle filled with a gradient. And gradients can be horizontal and vertical. So there's a brown vertical gradient down here in this sort of sand part, going from dark to light. And then in these triangles, I have a more of a horizontal gradient going from light to dark horizontally. And then I have this, my glowing red sky, orange sky, going from one color to another, again, vertically. Okay, so let's have a look at how we do that. We have overall an SVG, which has an open and a close. I am making some definitions. So my gradients, I define my gradients, and then later I use them. So there is the separation of the space, and make sure that you, if I do a gradient, and I probably will, that you have this proper separation. So there's the definition. Here is, I have 3 linear gradients. I have, here is my, I called it, I'm giving them IDs because I'm going to define a gradient and then use it in my picture. And if I want to use something that I made, then it must have an ID. We know that concept well. So this, I just called it the vertical yellow-red gradient. And you can make radial gradients and fancy things like that. I'm just sticking to sort of linear gradients. And I went from X, I didn't change X, but I changed Y, and I have X1 and X2 and Y1 and Y2. So I'm doing everything because this Y changed the percentage. That means I'm going in as, it's a vertical. And I have these offsets, and I usually just use them for the beginning and the end, but you can have in between stopping points. You can make a full like rainbow if you want. But so here's I'm defining the color at 0, I'm defining the color at 100. I'm saying that this 0 color is a yellow with opacity of 1, so you can't see through it. And the other one has an opacity of, is a color red with an opacity of 1. So I'm going from yellow to red, I'm going vertically. Here's my brown, and it is also vertical. And so again, so the change you see here is in the Y, and I'm going from a light brown to a dark brown. Here's my horizontal brown. So this time it was the X's that changed from 0 to 100. And the Y's that kept at 0, so that made that a horizontal gradient. And I gave it a starting and a stopping offset from light to dark brown. So that hasn't drawn anything. That's just a definition. Now I want to try and use it. So here's my rectangle that goes the full width, the 600. I have a square of 600 by 600. My sky goes to full width, but only 2/3 of the height. And it was this yellow, red vertical gradient. My ground starts at a Y of 400 and has a height of 200. So that is down at the bottom. That's down here at the bottom. You can see that. And it's using the vertical brown gradient. There's the vertical brown gradient. And then here's the new thing. Well, the linear gradients were new. And here's another new thing, the polygon. And here the points are easier than they were for the Bezier. These are just pure XY points. And XY points, but there's a weird notation here. The X and the Y are separated by a comma, and then the XY pairs are separated just by a space. So I have, this is a polygon consisting of 3 points, making it a triangle. I'm starting at 300, 500, that's one of the XY points, 200, 450, and 350 for 240. So if I give you something to make and it has a triangle, I'm not going to give you this syntax. I'm going to say, here are the points I want on my circle. Here's 3 XY points. I'll probably put them in parentheses. Here's the XY. Here's 0.1 XY. Here's 0.2 XY. Here's 0.3 XY. And then your job will be to translate it into this syntax. Okay. Here is the fill. The fill, it says URL, which is a little weird because we're not using a URL, but and we're using a pound sign. Pound sign in HTML and CSS usually refers to an ID. So we're saying go find in the definition the fill, or in this case, a gradient, which has this ID. Okay. No questions. All right. So that was pyramid. Greek. So here's Greek. I made a Greek alphabet, and I wanted to work with some sort of columns and spacing in my writing. So this was a little bit more than just simple text. If you just want to write a single word or something like that here or there, use text. But this is a way if you want to do a sort of fancier, more controlled writing. So again, the SVG. Here is text and the closed text. So I am within text, but now I'm using these things called T-span. So they are allowing me to control positioning within the text. And so you see I go 50, 250, 450, 650. Those are sort of my columns. I have 4 letters going across horizontally. And so this T-span with this X is giving me those sort of columns. Then I have the name of the Greek letter just spelled out. And then I have an HTML entity. So I looked up the HTML entities for my Greek letters. So I can get almost any character on a web page just by finding out the sort of number for it. And then you start with an ampersand and a pound sign and end with a semicolon. And then in between you have some number, and that announces that I'm making a character. So all the emojis and all the crap that you want, you can get on a web page. You just have to find the right number for it. These are the numbers for Greek letters. Okay, so I'm using, within text, I'm using T-span to control my spacing. I'm controlling the X's. This is controlling the X's absolute. Here, I'm doing a dy. Once I get to my second row, I'm using a dy. D stands for a change, like if you were in a calculus course or something. And so I'm changing, I'm going down by 1.2 EM. So EM is a unit that corresponds to sort of a character or a letter size. And I'm sort of going down like a little more than a full letter size. So to give myself a little bit of vertical spacing. So I'm going down, I'm forcing myself to go down. I'm back at a position of 50. So I'm back in my first column. And I only had to use the dy on the first one. On the first one in the second row, I used dy, and then everything that followed it has moved down. So then here is my epsilon, zeta, eta, theta at my 50, 250, 450, 650. And then I'm ready for my third row. So I'm back to 50 because that's more of an absolute thing. And a dy, I'm moving down vertically. So that's my game. So if you want to make your own thing, if you want to make some logo for a fraternity or sorority, that's fine. Just wanted to give you the skills for you to be able to do that. All right. And what else am I showing you today? That was Greek. And then some more programming-y ones. I usually don't ask you to program SVG, but it can be programmed. So I'm showing you two versions that are programmed, just to show you that it can be done. So here is the dynamic. And it's not dynamic in that it changes in time. That's the next one. But this one is dynamic, and then it's generated dynamically. So each time you make it, it's making it different. Okay. And so I have squares and circles. You can see that. I have like a grid, and I have a set of colors for the rectangles and a set of colors for the circles. And so I have an inner color for the circles and an outer color for the circles, and the same thing for the grids. And that's basically the game. So I have an SVG, an open and close. There's nothing in it. We are generating the grid dynamically. Here's my script. There's no function in here. So this code that's in the script is called when the page starts or is refreshed. Here's the these colors for the squares and for the circles that I was explaining before. Here is nested loops to create the grid. And we are creating an element. But if you are using something more esoteric elements, like SVG elements, then they don't, create element doesn't necessarily understand them. And so you say create element NS, the NS stands for a namespace. So we need an expanded namespace of elements so that it will understand. The SVGNS here is saying what that expanded namespace is. So that was defined up somewhere above. Here's a website. The W3 schools I'm using based on theirs. So they have this expanded namespace that I am making my program aware of. And so it's not a simple, we played with create element. But this is a fancier create element NS. So we need an expanded namespace. Here is the specific expanded namespace where it's located, where the program can find it. And then I'm getting a rectangular shape. And then I'm setting attributes, the same thing with an NS. I'm setting the X attribute, the Y attribute, the height attribute, the width attribute. You know, these were where we started with SVG. Those are the simple attributes of a rectangle. And then we also wanted to have some color. And so this is just some weird math to pick out the color of each square that I wanted. Set the color attribute, add it, append child, add it to my SVG. So I have this nested loop for each I and J. I add a rectangle and a circle. I add the circle second because of that Z axis thing. I want the circle to be on top of the rectangle. If the rectangle comes later, it will hide the circle. Okay. So just some fun combining JavaScript and SVG. Again, this is just supposed to be a holiday for us. So I won't ask you to combine JavaScript and SVG, but it can be done. One more. This is the fanciest one of all, because now there's a timer. I did some fancier crap here. So I'm rotating it. So I have some quantity, basically a variable in my style. It's a very fancy kind of thing. I have some transformations in my style. This is a very fancy thing. But here you can see I'm making circles. I'm making two sets of circles, and those sets of circles rotate in the opposite direction. That's not what I want. So basically I have white circles on a black background. I have a grid of white circles on a black background. I have two of them, and they're rotating in opposite directions. So again, so that's the fun of this. So here's one set of circles, here's the other set of circles. One has a class of clockwise, the other one has a class of counterclockwise. Here are those two styles, and they are changing. One of them has this variable of the rotational angle, the other one has 360 degrees minus. That's putting them getting them to move in that opposite direction. Okay. So that was a very fancy version. Okay, so that is the end. I didn't give you as much time to work today, but Thursday is a full-on working day. If you're done, everything's done, you're caught up, you're ready for the test, then no need to come. And that'll give me a chance to focus on the people who are trying to get ready for the test and need my help. Questions? All right, so stop recording.